4. I'll read the protocol for the meeting before we start, and it is as follows. All visitors must sign into the visitor book at the entrance to Kilncraigs, and this includes council staff from other buildings. There is no planned fire evacuation drill or alarm test today, so if the fire alarm is activated during your visit, you must exit the building immediately. Council officers will direct you to the nearest fire exit and will escort visitors to the building fire assembly point beside the Silver Man at the top of Parliament Walk. Kilncraig staff should report to their floor's assembly point. You should remain at your assembly point until directed to reoccupy the building and only re-enter once the fire marshal has advised it is safe to do so. Please do not attempt to leave the site by vehicle until cleared to do so by the fire marshal to ensure that access routes are kept clear for emergency vehicles. Please note that this is a public meeting and that members of the public may be in attendance in person or online. The meeting will also be recorded by the clerk and published online for public viewing afterwards. Otherwise, the taking of photographs, including screenshots, audio or video recordings, are not permitted during the meeting unless with the express permission of the chair, which is unlikely to be given, let me say. Can members attending virtually activate their cameras where possible to enable you to join by video? Doesn't apply today. And can all attendees mute the microphones when not speaking? Please do not come in during items unless I invite you to do so. If members attending, well, I don't need to read that one out. If members have not been able to access all papers for the meeting, please indicate now. Good. I will now ask the clerk to confirm attendance for all here. All right. We will just move on to item 1. Oh, yes. Yes. Have any members any interest to declare at this point? Not even a passing interest in the Okay. Right. Item number 1. Apologies, we've done. And now we'll go to the minutes of last meeting. Okay. These are the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held in this council chamber on Thursday, the 28th of September. Am I on the right one?
The Monday, the 22nd of May.
I missed one. Okay.
Yes. Page 5.
Page 5. Oh, yeah, this one. Okay, sorry, this. Yes, wrong place. Okay, the meeting of the local review body, which was held in this chamber on the 22nd of May 2023 at 1:30. We'll go through those minutes page by page. If there are any corrections or omissions, please let me know. Page 5, page 6, and what there is on page 7. Nothing? Okay. Right. Next is the one I advised or advertised earlier, the Planning Committee meeting on the 28th of September. We'll go through the minutes of that page by page for errors and omissions. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. No, everything okay. Any updates? Okay, item 4, which is the first main report of the day, and this is concerning the application for approval of reserved matters specified in condition for 10-00153 TPP for the site master plan at Rams Hill. And this report will be given to us by Keith Johnson, Principal Planner.
Good morning. I have some introductory comments. The report provides our assessment of an application for matters specified in conditions. Relates to planning permission in principle granted of the Scottish Ministers in May last year. And this was for the development of a large area of agricultural land to the northwest of Saltby for houses, school and associated works. The planning permission in principle, or PPP, set out the terms within which details of the development of the land has to be progressed and the scope of the information required for consideration at the matter specified in condition MSC stage. This includes a Section 75 obligation as well as 8 planning conditions. The terms of Section 75 are summarised in paragraph 3.11 of the report. The planning permission principle approved up to 1,000 houses on the site. This application contains details of the master plan for the overall development of the site. Section 75 required an application for the master plan to be submitted alongside the first application for development on the site, and development can't commence until the master plan has been approved by the council. The PPP requires the application for matter specified condition includes a master plan in condition 5A. Section 3 of the report provides a summary of the master plan drawing, which is intended to set out the broad framework and components of development of the site, which will be progressed in a number of phases over a period estimated by an applicant to be around 15 years. Some key elements include 2 versions of the master plan, one which shows an area of land which has to be safeguarded for a possible primary school on the site, and one without. Safeguarded land is in the southeastern part of the site, next to Branshill Road and 10 acres, and this is regulated by the terms of the Section 75. The development of housing is shown around a central area which would accommodate areas of open space and amenity space, including sustainable urban drainage systems. This open space area is in the lowest lying, flatter area of the site, which runs east to west and follows the existing core path route, which is tarred and lit and connects 10 acres with Lawrencehill Academy, Tullibody and Glenorchy Village. There would be a network of areas of open space, including some play equipment, within various phases of the development. The layout includes some green corridors connecting the central area of open space through the development, which would link to the woodland areas which enclose the site to the north, south and west. Access to the site would be from a spine road, which would continue through the site between an access on the B908 near to the Dewsons Builder Merchants and an access onto Branshill Road at the southeast corner of the site. This spine road would be tree-lined and capable of accommodating buses. The housing would be accessed from the spine road by a network of interconnecting streets and paths. There would be secondary streets providing access to the main areas in a loop design, with a network of shorter tertiary streets served from the loops, mainly in the form of shared surface areas. Active travel routes would combine sections of the roads with segregated landscape paths, which would connect into the core path. Approximately 13 hectares of the site would comprise green space, including existing woodland area, areas of new planting, landscaping and suds. As I say, the main green space would comprise a corridor or linear park alongside the core path, which also accommodates the Saltby Burn. The overall approach and concept are considered to accord with the 6 principles to create successful places, being distinctive, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, welcoming, adaptable and resourceful. A number of other documents and assessments have been submitted to support the master plan to help demonstrate how key impacts and opportunities would be addressed. These include a transport assessment, TA, traffic calming and cycle infrastructure note, design and access statement, landscape strategy, landscape and visual impact assessment, a landscape and biodiversity statement, indicative drainage designs, flood risk assessment, and indicative cross-sections. Summary and analysis of consultation responses set out in paragraph 3.13. There have not been any objections from consultees, including transportation, environmental health and SEPA. Transportation has advised that while the amended transport assessments submitted by an applicant has helped address issues identified in its consultation response, there are still some outstanding issues requiring further information or clarification. These relate to the location design of off-street active travel routes to be funded by the development, traffic calming on roads leading to the site, and measures to improve the capacity and safety of road junctions identified in the TA. These measures relate to impacts associated with the development of the whole site and have been assessed as part of the consideration of the master plan drawing. It should be noted that the delivery of transport works required to mitigate any impacts are regulated by the Section 75, which requires specification and design to be agreed and sets out the mechanism for payment of contributions from the developer. Our assessment of the advice from transportation and responses from the developer has concluded these outstanding matters should be capable of being addressed, but it wasn't possible to conclude them all before the report was finalised. Therefore, conditions have been attached which prevent development commencing until the matters have been addressed to our satisfaction. This would ensure the principles of design and location of the measures have been established before any. The report notes transportation advised more segregated and active travel routes be created as part of the network of routes. We have concluded that the proposed hierarchy of streets would be satisfactory. It includes segregated travel paths, active travel paths along the most heavily trafficked roads, including the Spine Road, which we then connect into the core path and surrounding area. Further information relating to flood risk from surface and groundwater is also required. And again, this can be regulated by conditions to ensure the information is agreed before any development commences on site. A total of 61 neighbours were notified of the application. It was publicised in the local paper. 3 objections have been received, the content of which are summarised in paragraph 3.21. These raised a number of issues relating to house numbers, impact on local services and their ability to cope, disturbance from building work for a lengthy period, road safety and capacity, impact on wildlife, loss of privacy, and impact on amenity and traffic. The report provides responses to these points. Many relate to issues which have already been determined by the decision to grant planning permission in principle taken at appeal. That decision concluded that the impacts from the development of 1,000 houses on the area would not be unacceptable and has determined what mitigation is required in terms of developer contributions, which are regulated in the Section 75. The proposed design and layout is considered to enhance the wider biodiversity value of the site, and there would be mitigation measures required to improve key junctions, infrastructure provision for walkers and cyclists out with the site to encourage active travel journeys. Section 4 contains the planning assessment of the application in relation to the development plan. The report notes that the site has been allocated for development for over 13 years, and therefore progress to development commencing is a positive situation. The principle of development has been granted by the planning permission principle, and the policy assessment considers how the master plan and supporting information accords with relevant policies. These are summarised in the report, including policies relating to biodiversity, natural places and habitats, woodland and trees, low and green infrastructure, and concludes that subject to the conditions relating to tree planting in the shelter belt to the north of the site, the master plan approach would be consistent with relevant policy guidance to support sustainable development. Paragraph 4.13 discusses relevant transportation policies and concludes that the master plan accords with objectives in relation to enhancement of active travel provision and links, sustainable travel hierarchy, safeguards pedestrian safety, ensures accessibility to public transport, and will include electric vehicle charging points for each house. A condition is proposed which sets out the remaining issues within the transport assessment, which need to be agreed by the Council. This position takes cognizance of the conclusions reached by the reporter in the appeal decision relating to road safety and impacts on the road network. The report also considers a number of policies relating to design and placemaking, plain open space, public art, flood risk and sustainable water management. It's concluded the application and proposed master plan would not be contrary to the development plan, subject to the proposed conditions, having regard to the terms of the Section 75. The report concludes by discussing a number of other material considerations, including the advice from consultees, the issues raised in the 3 objections, and the advice and the relevant supplementary guidance published by the Council. The MSC application for the master plan is considered to accord with the provisions of the development plan, the requirements of the planning permission in principle is considered. There's no other material considerations which we don't read. development plan support, and justify withholding permission. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in section 2 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Any questions from members? Councillor McTaggart,
I've got 3 questions, Chair. Is that okay?
please. That's what we need.
Paragraph 3.4a, where it says land that is safeguarded for a possible primary school. Can this land be safeguarded to say that it can't be redesignated without coming back to the planning authority? Because when it says possible, then there are no guarantees that that land couldn't be redesignated in the future. And I just feel that we will need a primary school in the future. And I feel that the designation should be more secure than that. Thanks, Keith.
The reference to the designation relates to the Section 75 agreement, which was entered into between the council and the developer at the appeal. So there is a requirement. The land is safeguarded for the council to decide if they want to build a school there. There is a time scale set out in that agreement. I think in the table and education is just page 19. But basically the council has to decide within a time scale, just to sort of get it report. Yeah, so after 300 houses, the council effectively has to give notice to the developer if it wants to pursue building a school on the safeguarded land. So up until that point, that land is safeguarded by the terms of the legal agreement, and the council has to make a decision by that date. If the council decides they don't want that land, then it could well be developed for another purpose if it's seen as being not required in terms of the requirements of the education estate. As I say, I think it's safeguarded under the terms of the Section 75 attached to the planning permission.
Thanks, Keith. I still think that leaves it a bit ambiguous for the future, but these are the regulations. Thank you.
Sorry, Jane, can I interrupt at this point? Just before we leave that, so we're making a decision a third of the way through the development whether we need a school by the end of the development. Why would we have to decide as soon as that? I think that's kind of the point that the councillor is making. And it seems a bit early in the process, not even halfway through the development. I mean, I know that population figures can come and go in schools, registers can go up and down, but it does seem to me to be a bit early. Can you justify that line being drawn at that point?
I mean, I think what I would say is we have what we have in terms of, that is the terms of the Section 75, which is attached to the planning permission in principle, so we can't revisit that. That decision was taken, as I say, through the planning appeal process, after consultation between planning and education services. So the developer has to, the impact on education capacity has been agreed. There has to be a contribution towards that. The options are that, that there's an extension to Craigbank Primary School, but the council would have the opportunity to obtain or purchase the land within the site under the terms of that Section 75. As I say, that time scale and that cut-off or trigger date has been included in the Section 75, and I don't think at this stage we're in a position to revisit that.
Okay, thanks. Is that supplementary to that?
I just wondered, what's the timescale for the 300th house? Because it depends, from what I've heard, that there could be other developers going into the space as well, so that would quicken the timescale of the 300th house being built. So it would be good to know if we have a timescale for that.
Keith?
Maybe just back to what Keith was saying then, maybe help clarify that point, because I was involved in discussing and agreeing the Section 75 agreement along with the education service. So the timescales that are set out in the Section 75 are really predicated on what capacity there currently is in Craigbank Primary School, and at which point the development would use up that capacity, and then the council would have to decide in advance of that whether it needed to extend Craigbank or provide a new school. So that's why the timescales are set out in that way, with input from the education service. And the 300 house is obviously a trigger point. There isn't really a lot of control other than how quickly the developer or developers build the houses to that point. So the council will obviously be able to monitor house completions as they go along. So we'll have a long lead-in time to be able to sort of see how quickly the development's been built out. But there's something the education service have to be sort of strongly involved in. So they determine if they want to either extend Craigbank or take the opportunity to build a new school.
Thanks. Councillor McTaggart.
Just coming back in on both the points, Craigbank Primary School will be difficult to extend. We all know that it's going to be a difficult landscape to extend. At the point, at the 300, which I find quite big is, but at the 300 point, there may well be a secondary development. I think that's what Councillor Law was sort of getting at. We've got the Carsbridge development that could potentially be kicking off by the time we reach the 300 point at Socky West. So we've got a further impact coming into that potential catchment area. I'm just wondering if at the 300 point, if the council still hasn't decided, would the council have the opportunity to extend that safeguarding? Bearing in mind that there will be other developments. So at that 300 house point, could the decision be that we may not want to start building at the school now, potentially we're going to need the school in a year or 2 years' time, whatever. Could we extend that safeguarding at that point?
I think other developments such as Carsbridge, Keith will maybe keep me right here, but it's a different catchment. It's not the Craigbank catchment. I think it's be a part. Yeah.
That's a knock-on effect.
The answer to the second question is that as Section 35 is written at the moment, no, we can't extend that. We would have to, if we wanted to extend that time period, we would have to try and seek agreement with the developer to vary the Section 75. So as it stands, that's not what we can do, but there is a process to try and do that, but it would have to be with the agreement of the developer.
So as it stands at the moment, if we wanted to secure that land for future consideration, we'd have to buy it.
Whatever the council, if the council decides it needs that land for the school at any point, it will have to buy that land, it will have to purchase it, whatever. That's already the case.
And that would be at the 300 point. We'd have to make that decision to buy it or not.
Yeah. As I say out in the agreement, the council has to decide if it wants to have the developer contribution to extend Craigbank or take the land, or buy land, I should say, to build a new school.
Okay, any more questions on that point? Sorry.
No questions on that particular point, Chair. I'm looking through here and I noticed that 1,000 houses is a big development. I know villages that only got 1,000 houses down it. Will there be any future provision for any social housing? Because I noticed this development is solely about private development.
In terms of these applications for MSC follow the planning permission principle, and we have to work within the provisions of the planning permission principle. That didn't provide or require the developer to bring forward social or affordable housing, and that argument was put at the appeal, and the council wasn't successful with that argument. So it would be a matter of, the service has already asked if there's scope for the housing mix to be reviewed or to bring forward a bigger mix of housing types. We've got no powers to require that, so that it would be up to developers looking at the project and the scale of the development. That there could be benefits or to mix up the housing, but there's no requirement, we can't require them to deliver.
So at the moment, there has been no indication that the developer is going to look at providing social.
Could you use your mic, please?
So at the moment, the developer hasn't indicated any way that they may possibly look at providing social housing.
Well, we are just at the first kind of phase of development, so time will tell. As I say, we're happy to work with the applicant and to look at opportunities if they're possible to deliver a bigger mix. But as I say, that kind of argument to require something to be provided wasn't successful when the appeal was determined.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McTighe.
Just to clarify Councillor Errol's point, when this application went to appeal, one of the considerations that the reporter looked at was our housing needs and demand assessment. Our housing needs and demand assessment is out of date. We will hopefully have that up to date by the end of this year. But the housing needs and demand assessment didn't lend itself to the argument that we needed social housing because it's so far out of date. And we know that. We know that was a stumbling block for us. We're working on that. I don't know if there'll be in the future when the development starts to be, when there are actually houses on the ground, in sometime in the future, there'll be a time to, as Keith says, negotiate with the developer under the new housing needs and assessment paper to see if it's potentially possible to incorporate social housing. But as it stands right now, it was the housing needs and demand assessment that really scuppered us for that. So much so that the Alwa Park site, which did have an inclusion of social housing, was appealed, and they won the appeal that they don't have to provide social housing because that set a precedent that we don't need it. So it kind of scuppered us on both places. But there was social housing there at the beginning, but they won it on appeal.
Thank you.
Kenny, Mike, were you coming back on that? No. I think that maybe some clarification could be useful here because the housing needs and development report, it was likely to be crystallising in November of this year, something like that. If it's in place, does it affect future phase developments, or has it been affected by the master plan, and that's the effect for all time for the whole deal, or is each phase of the development subject to the existing housing needs assessment?
In the case of this development, the planning commission in principle sets the framework for the whole development for all the phases. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Councillor Quinn, I think you were hands up quite a wee while ago.
Hello, thank you. I've just got a question about the contribution for education. It's like, do we know what that's likely to be, or what that covers? Like, is that going to be leaving us out of pocket in some way to fill the gap? Thanks.
The contribution to education, again, is regulated under the Section 75 obligation. Basically, prior to commencement of developer, so this is out with the terms of this current application in front of us for the master plan, but the developer has to prepare and submit a detailed specification for the extension to Craigbank, which is all defined in the Section 75. That has to be agreed between the council, education and the developer, and then costed, and that would then inform the contribution that then would come forward from development on the site. So that process is still to be concluded, but it is regulated under the terms of the Section 75. I know that the developer and education have been in consultation with each other about agreeing the information, but that is the framework that was set down in the Section 75. So there has to be fully costed plans about what is required to meet the capacity need, and then that then informs the contribution that will then come forward from from the development of the site.
It's just a quick follow up to that then. So if we decide that we need a new school, does that change this calculation at all? Or are they just required to provide that we no longer want? Or is it the same amount of money just get put in the new school? Because it doesn't seem very good to me. But there you go. If you could clarify that, that'd be good.
The contribution is calculated in terms of what the impact of the development would have on the existing education estate capacity. So that's worked out, and as I say, in terms of the class spaces, the terms of the Section 75 requires that calculation to be done, and that would be the contribution from the developer. If the council decided to pursue a new school instead, then it would only be the monies from the costs that I've just described that would be used towards the new school. It wouldn't be to fund a whole new school, an additional contribution from the developer. The council would have the contribution calculated as required, and they would have to use that towards funding a new school.
Councillor Benny.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick question on the actual housing. The first 300 houses going up, are they going to be mixed, or are they all going to be 4 or 5 bedroom, or all 3 bedroom, or is there going to be a mix within that?
There's, I don't know what they're all going to be. I mean, the current information we have is for about the 200 houses, and they're mainly detached 3-4 bedroom houses, but there is a mix through it. There's, I think in the second application on the agenda, that has about 20, I think, semi-detached houses, but they're primarily detached houses that are within the proposals at this stage for the initial phases.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll go to Councillor Law, then Councillor Balsillie, and then Councillor McTaggart.
Just a couple. Can I just check? See on 3.8, it says the last sentence, it's got as allocated in LDP to a minimum of 1,000. To take that's meant to be maximum. That's just a typo on that one. I just wanted to ask about the master plan in regards to play spaces and what does that actually mean? And I've never seen the term pocket park, so I just wondered if I could get clarification on what a pocket park is and what the play space is, because I think there's confusion sometimes when it says play amenity and whether that's an equipped play park or just an area to play. So it would just be good to kind of get a steer on what that will mean for the master plan.
Yeah, I think in terms of the areas, I mean, obviously at the master plan stage, there will have to then be detailed plans for each phase coming forward, and that will have a specification for the open space. I mean, the pocket parks are really, I think, to describe kind of smaller area of open space which has play equipment within it, and I think that's essentially what that means. In terms of amenity space, could then include areas with landscape next to the footpaths. As I say, there will be quite extensive open space alongside the core path, which will also incorporate kind of SUDS layout as well, so that these would be more landscape, but would have some functional operation as kind of SUDS drainage scheme. So I think there will be, in terms of the master plan, it shows a kind of central linear park alongside the core path, and then within phases within the site there are these what I would call kind of park areas which would have some play equipment or would be usable by children or others to, as amenity space.
And just in regards to, because obviously I know I would agree that the plans that have been put forward that will increase the biodiversity. A lot of it's talking about tree planting. I know that when you do plant trees, a lot of them won't take. So will the developer have to go back and ensure that the trees that aren't taken, that they are replaced, and new trees, and make sure that they are growing before obviously handing them over to, I don't know, a factor, because it won't be the council that will be maintaining them. So I just wanted to check in regards to the kind of programme that will be there, that they will take responsibility to make sure whatever planting they are putting in is working, before obviously handing that over.
The landscaping, yes, the details of the specification, but also future maintenance and ownership of those areas have to be approved by the council. Again, that actually is regulated in section 75 as well, so I think we have to bring that forward for approval before any phase can commence development. So we would have control over that to ensure we're satisfied arrangements are in place so that landscaping specification will have establishment and also measures to replace plants that either are damaged or don't, so that we do get the landscaping established and then well maintained.
Councillor Balsillie.
Thanks, Chair. This site's got a long history. I'm just curious. Originally, the site's got a history of very shallow coal reserves and bell pits. Originally, and I'm talking about over a decade ago, the concept was to strip the coal out first to supply Longannet. That's obviously our last coal power station that's closed. But I was just curious in the method statement, is there any proposals from the developer in terms of how they are tackling coal on site, or is it just remaining in situ?
To be honest, I'm not sure if I know if there will be any risk of encountering actual coal when they build on the site. That's something we would have to clarify for you. In terms of risks, there are potential risks from legacy mining from underground shallow mines. And as I say, the developer will have to do some grouting to stabilise land on parts of the site. So certainly they have assessed the risks associated with historic mining in the area. If there was any coal itself, I think that's it's not going to be encountered as part of the development of the houses. But that would obviously be regulated by the Coal Authority if that was the case. But certainly legacy mining has been assessed adequately, and the Coal Authority originally did ask for some further information about addressing those matters, and are now satisfied that the developer is aware, has addressed, and has a system to deal with those risks.
Probably worth adding that because of the topography of the site as well, that to develop housing on it, it's quite steeply sloping. Some parts of it there is quite a sort of cut and fill exercise that will have to be undertaken. And Keith's worked quite hard with the developers to ensure that's really a fairly sort of minimal exercise, so there aren't sort of areas of high embankments and sort of big changes in levels between housing spaces and open spaces. So there's been quite a lot of work done with the architect and the engineers to make sure that that's a very minimal exercise, although it's still going to be quite extensive bit of engineering to make the site ready for housing.
So just to clarify, in terms of our method statement, there's no longer any aspiration to exploit coal if they were to come across it in those land engineering operations?
No, not at all. No.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor McTaggart.
Thanks, Chair. 3.16 regarding surface water. That land already floods regularly, very, very regularly onto the Glenorchy Road. So I'm wondering, hard landscaping has the potential to increase that, to increase the egress onto Glenorchy Road. What mitigations have been put in place to prevent that happening? Because I mean, it's already bad enough. I can imagine that being turned into a river if there are no proper mitigations put in place with hard landscaping on top. Thanks.
Is the Glenorchy Road the road over to Cullyland roundabout? Or?
Runs past Glenorchy Village, and so the land, sorry, at the Cullyland roundabout. to the left, going towards Glenacle Village, that is literally flooded regularly. I used to do that run 4 times a day, and it is regularly flooded. So the housing at the top of there, pushing that water, hard landscaping and pushing that water further down. There is a farmer's field at the bottom of there as well. So I'm just wondering what mitigations there are to ensure that we're not just going to push water further in and create a bigger problem than we already have.
There has been a flood assessment and information about surface water and other groundwater issues. That's not been identified as a potential risk. I know the development site, northern boundary kind of sits at on the ridge, and then it drops to the south, towards the Sauchie Burn. So I think generally the hydrology, water will flow towards to the south, and obviously the levels there on the ridge drop down towards the Sauchie Burn. There is, in the conditions, requirements of further assessment of groundwater impacts, so potentially that could be covered by that assessment as well, just to double check that there's not going to increase any risks towards the north of the site. As I say, I think general topography, it all drops quite steeply down to the south, so I would imagine any impacts from the development would be in that direction rather than to the north towards the B9140.
Thanks, Keith.
Jane, can I just ask a supplementary to that? When the flooding assessment was done, presumably they take into account soil compaction because of the buildings, etc., and the diminution of the ability of the total area to hold water, so that it's released slowly into the Sauchie Burn. Has that analysis been done in the flood assessment?
As I say, there's still to be, as set out in the report, condition there's still to be some technical assessment of the management of surface water and groundwater. The risks from flooding from Sauchie Burn have been assessed, and the layout addresses the potential risks from that. So there is as I say, those matters have still got to be addressed through the requirements of the planning conditions in terms of surface water flows and how they will be managed, in terms of the SUDS drainage system that's been provided. So we do have still to receive information to cover those issues. Okay, thanks. Councillor Whittaker.
I've got another question, but just supplementary to that, Chair. If the water's been corralled, let's say, towards the south of the site, that then covers the active travel path that goes up to Lawrence Hill. So potentially that's pushing the water in an area that we didn't want it to go, because before it reaches Sauchie Burn, it's got to reach these areas that are already enhanced to encourage active travel. And I noticed a bit in the paper regarding the impact on the active travel route of the development. So just wouldn't like to see further impact if that water's going to be pushed in that direction.
As I say, that will all have to be addressed through the drainage scheme that they propose. As I say, it is quite extensive in terms of the kind of facility or SUDS scheme they have in terms of before it even gets down to the kind of Sauchie Burn. There's swales, there's rain gardens, then there will be SUDS, there'll be basins and ponds within the lower area, and these all have to be calculated to accommodate the amount of water. And there is a design event, a storm event, that it's calculated and based on. So it's not a guarantee for it. There'll never be a flood, but it has to be designed taking account of the 1 in 200 storm event plus an allowance for climate change. So that's all factored into the design so that surface water will be managed. And in theory, hopefully that's going to be better than perhaps at the moment in terms of if it's just fields There will be more technical solutions there to slow down the water. And as I say, I think those details still have to be approved by the council. I'm confident that the core path would be safeguarded adequately.
Thanks. Sorry about belabouring on that, but
That's what we're here for.
the Alba Park, the new Alba Park development, I've just lost all confidence in every possible type of drainage because it's a disaster, and we can get all these recommendations and we can get all these assurances, and in actual fact, when things happen, they didn't quite happen the way that we expected them to. So I'm sorry for labouring on that. The other question was regarding NHS provision. I'm just quite, I suppose I'm quite disappointed that NHS hasn't engaged in the application, and I'm just wondering, are there opportunities to engage with NHS and to get them to take a realistic view of the lack of services, the impact on services in the future that this development might have? Because anecdotally, I've been getting asked about things like, well, that health centre can't cope as it is, or NHS can't cope as it is. How are we meant to cope with all these additional? And people tend to look at 1,000 houses as if they're going to spring up overnight. However, it is a worry for people, and it has been raised to me. How will this impact on local NHS services, doctors, nurses, dentists, etc.? And there doesn't seem to have been an engagement in the consultation for the NHS. So I'd be keen to know if that's going to be pursued in the future.
Maybe just that one. There's obviously we're working in the parameters of the planning commission in principle, and there's nothing in there in respect of contributions to NHS private health provision. So I suppose the short answer to that question is that there's no mechanism now to have that come into the mix now. In saying that, NHS Forth Valley been well aware of this site being in the development plan for many years. So it shouldn't be a surprise that it's coming forward. And like you say, Councillor McTaggart, there'll be a long running time to get to the site reaching its 1,000 house capacity, something like 15 years. So I can only suggest or hope that they will take advice and solve that and what impact it has on their facilities. But at the moment, there's no mechanism to put anything into the planning side of things now.
Thanks. Disappointing.
Anyone else got a question? I'm just make a general point before I ask my question, if I can find it. I'm getting the feeling is, as we're listening to the responses and reading the paper, there's an awful lot of things that still got to be decided. An awful lot of things. I kind of feels a bit odd being asked to approve a master plan with so many question marks and subject to agreement. We've got to have this conversation, we've got to talk about that. What's the response on the question? Are we looking at this too soon?
The way the planning commission principle is set up is that the first application must comprise a master plan, which is what we have in front of us. But there are also a number of other planning conditions that affect not just the overall master plan, but the detailed phases of each site as we go along. We've discussed some of them already today in terms of drainage and things like roads hierarchy that Keith was mentioning, and the details of landscaping. But really, that really is the way things are set up with the planning commission in principle. There's nothing in approving the master plan today that is going to jeopardise the council having control over these detailed elements as we go along. There's already the conditions in the PPP that cover those things, and as Keith mentioned, and you see in the report, there are other sort of supplementary conditions essentially that still require things to be nailed down in detail. It's probably just not realistic to get all the detail of a 1,000 house development at this stage. That in some ways we wouldn't want that, because there's things that have to be worked up before the spade goes in the ground, and that's just an ongoing process.
So are we saying then that we'll get much more clarity when we discuss each individual phase? Is that when we would expect these answers to be in front of us.
Well, obviously, for instance, the next application on the agenda is for phase one, and we have very much of a detailed layout there of where every house is going, where every fence is going, where every hedge is going. So that sort of level of detail is coming in as the phase applications come in.
Yeah, but some of the bigger issues that we raised, like flooding generally, house types is another thing. I kind of understand why you want to build expensive ones first to fund future activity. I get that. And things like the trees brought up, etc., education, health centre, health requirements. There's a lot of things that are kind of quite vague and smoky at this point.
I think the master plan is kind of what it says. It's not a detailed plan of everything. It sets out a development framework. It shows us where the phases of housing development are going to be. It gives us information on where the areas of landscaping, hard and soft, are going to be, some of the informal and more formal play spaces. So it's a framework within which once it's approved, within which each MSC subsequent application has to fit within. So it's a kind of, I suppose you could almost see it as a middle stage between the PTP and those detailed applications. This is where we're at with the master plan.
Right. Okay, so it's a sort of general principle thing, basically.
Yeah, it's taking it from a red line around the side to what the framework of development will generally look like, yeah.
Could I just, sorry, I'd interject as well, just to say, I mean, some of the conditions, for example, relating to the transportation issues, technically they are covered by the section 75, but we have kind of belts and braces added that as planning conditions, so that we're ensuring that development's not commencing on site before these have been finalised or agreed by us. So there are a couple of these conditions in there which you could argue technically, will be covered also by the section 75, but I think we felt we wanted to ensure, as I think you're suggesting, that those details are all agreed and we know what's going on before the kind of first house is started. And as I say, negotiations, we're confident some of these details, that we'll get a resolution and address them. It hasn't been possible to conclude that within, before this committee meeting, but I'm fairly confident that that will happen. So there is an element of some of the conditions we've tried to ensure that we've got as much control as possible over the developer.
Councillor Law.
I'll just point I suppose the anxiety here has been brought on by the fact that I believe that work started up at the site, and I know that obviously Scottish Power, as it says in I think this paper or the next paper, that they didn't need permission for that. However, we know that there was tree felling, which I think really got quite a lot of people's back up, and I think that's why we're quite concerned about obviously the lack of some of these details, because work has commenced when it shouldn't have done, and I think that's kind of where that kind of worry is coming, that we don't have that control over the developer and what's actually happening on the site.
Just a comment, really.
Well, comment anyway. Do you agree that they started work when they should have started work? Do you agree, my anxiety?
I think the tree works on site and connecting the Scottish Power works did create some confusion and the impression that things were happening that they were not yet having consent, and I think that was probably slightly unfortunate. I agree. Yeah.
Just one of the objections was made on the grounds of water pressure is already an issue and getting worse with each development, someone said. And the comment on that is Scottish Water has no objections. The site can be satisfactorily serviced. Was that particular point checked out, do you know, by Scottish Water in their examinations, that the water pressure has been increasing?
In terms of the consultation response, that specific point, was not discussed with Scottish Water. The developer will have to apply for consent to, obviously obtain supplying as a kind of development approval process that Scottish Water have with any developer. As I say, we've consulted Scottish Water and they've provided no objection to it, and they've added that, they can supply public water supply to it. The detailed design or arrangements for that would be then agreed between the developer and Scottish Water.
I just feel there's a bit of a fudge going on here. It sounds as if Scottish Water have said, no, it'll be fine. That's kind of what you worry about, and that there may be things in the infrastructure that they're not aware of that could cause future problems. It'd be quite good to have that kind of thing. A pretty fundamental requirement that kind of thing is sorted out beforehand.
Yeah. The way that Scottish Water engage at this stage is that they will tell us about capacity in the wastewater systems. And it's only
Inlet pressure.
yeah, and it's only really when the developer has planning permission that they can go to Scottish Water and they make their application for connections. And it's at that point the developer will then have to meet whatever requirements Scottish Water have in terms of those more detailed points. So that might sound like the process is slightly out of sync, but that's how it is. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Law.
So I know that when the roads are getting built, there has to be a bond put in place, and it's just I know of developments that have happened around Scotland, and obviously there's been issues with builders going bust, and there's developments being made, and the issues then being the connection with Scottish Water. Is there a bond put in place that, say, a development is kind of half built? Is there a bond put through in order to get the connections made, so that people are in their houses, but obviously that not all the connections are made to, like, say, Scottish Water and whatnot? Is there different ways to help secure that work still to be done if there was then an issue with builder on bus, which I hope they don't go, but I've heard of cases that's currently happened, and I just wondered if there's any way to kind of secure that going forward for whoever buys these houses.
I don't, a lot of detailed information about that point. The roads bonds really come through the roads construction consent rather than the planning permission. Quite what bonds or safeguards are in place between Scottish Water and the developer or Scottish Water and the householder. It's not something we've got a lot of sight on, to be honest, but the tends to be things like NHBC, National House Builders Council, which is almost a sort of insurance policy for house buyers against things going wrong in their development. But I say it's really not something that the planning service is involved in at all, I'm afraid.
Are you thinking along the lines of the owners are in the house and then there's water? You wouldn't get habitation.
No, so they're in, but at that point, so they're in, but then the infrastructure's not been adopted at that point. So then it's still with the builder to have issues.
And then the builder goes back.
Yeah, because sometimes like the Scottish Water won't adopt it all because there's still ongoing work. It happened down in Alloa Park, a water main that got hit, but it was within the building area, so it was the developer that had to sort that out, not Scottish Water's responsibility, even though the developer got Scottish Water in to do it. Yeah. But at that point, it hadn't been adopted, so it's still with the builder.
Yeah, that adoption point is really, so I think he's saying that the householders have to have these connections before they get their habitation certificate, but that doesn't mean those things have to be adopted, and that process between the developer and Scottish Water or the developer and the council roads authority is ongoing. I mean, most people who buy a new house in a new development will be using unadopted roads for a period of time. Yeah, that's always the case.
I'll check into it.
Okay. Any other questions? No, right, we move to proposing a paper. And on the basis of the assurance given to us by Grant that all will be well.
I don't think I said that.
We'll minute that, shall we? In that case, I will formally propose the paper. Second? Councillor McTaggart, thank you. Do we wish to debate the paper? Councillor Basili.
Yeah. This application has been a long time coming. It's in the system, and I think members have obvious concerns, probably because of recent events, and also the application was taken out of our hands by going to the reporter, but we've had a fair debate about the issues today. I think some of the key aspects are about the school provision and whether we will secure a permanent school site, new school site, or when, after 300 houses are provided, which way the council goes in terms of providing a school or not. But I'm hoping that when we have, hopefully at the end of the year, a housing needs assessment, if that site doesn't go for a school site and inevitably be submitted for housing, that we could at that point introduce affordable housing element into it, because I don't think that's part of these sort of phasings. The other aspect I'm pleased to see in this application is actually the percentage for art. I was going to ask a question about this, but I didn't want to be pedantic about it, but I'm given an earlier debate. I'm hoping that when we refer to a committed sum, we're actually referring to money that the developer is going to provide so that we can provide percentage for art off-site, perhaps in some of our active travel routes. I'm prejudging things, but that when we're talking about percentage of art being spent on-site or a committed sum, we're actually talking about a committed sum for off-site work. I don't know if I should have asked that as a sort of question, but I'm pleased of the diligence that our planning officers have put into this application, despite the fact that effectively being taken out of our hands. And I think we'll be rehearsing some of these arguments in the first phase that we're about to discuss, or perhaps we feel we've covered it. But I'm delighted to see the level of conditions we put in. I would always like to have seen some more in relation to social housing, but we know why that isn't in there, so I'm happy to support the application.
Any further? Councillor Errol?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm glad to hear that, thank you very much for the explanation about the social housing provision. I mean, that really clarified a few things. I hope that as the development goes on in the next 15 years, and with the new housing analysis, that we will be able to provide some form of social housing within the sites and within future sites as well. The Councillor McTaggart also raised a very good point about the NHS provision. Now, we're all aware that if you use the services in the health centre as a moment, that there are some of the practices that are bursting at the seams. And they are struggling not only for space, but they're struggling for doctors. I mean, that's a problem that we have right across the country, that we have a shortage of doctors. But if we now have 1,000 houses, that's potentially another 4,000 people. Because if we take mum and dad and two parents, that's 4,000 people actually going to use that. It's another 2,000 people going to put pressure on the education system. Because is it going to be enough for the primary school? As we move into secondary school, is there going to be a provision there in secondary schools that's going to take that additional numbers? So there's lots of questions still to be asked. But we are asked here today to just approve this paper, and I see no reason to not to approve it.
I take the point, and I guess we've always got that parcel of land. If there isn't a requirement for education, the land could be acquired, I guess, by the NHS to build a facility there. But I mean, it's disappointing that the NHS don't engage the way that they should do in these things. Very, very disappointing. And you know, they're missing an opportunity to put a fund aside for future development of health facilities, and they just head in the sand completely about this. However, as you say, Councillor, it doesn't get in the way of us approving this paper, I think. So I take it we've all said what we want to say, and are we minded to approve? We are. Thank you very much. Item 5, this is now a subset of the master plan, phase 1 development, and we'll get a report on this from Keith.
This next application contains the matter specifying conditions for the first phase of development on the site, comprising 157 houses in the northeastern part of the site, adjacent to the B908, and extends south-westerly to the core path. The proposals include the construction of a new roundabout on the B908, which would create an access to the larger site. The spine road is extended through the site for future phases. Phase 1 includes land to the north and south of the spine road. The roundabout design includes the realignment of a section of the B908 to part of the woodland to the north of the roundabout, and new junctions to access Jewson's Builder Merchants and the private road which serves 3 houses and allotments. The location and design of the roundabout satisfies the requirements of the Planning Commission in principle. Advice from Transportation. The layout reflects the terms of the master plan, with houses accessed by a network of streets, with houses fronting first section of the spine road. 2 areas of open space which would be included, one with play equipment, and a suds basin and landscaping in the southern part of the site, parallel to the core path. The layout includes a segregated footpath linking the spine road with the core path, and a footpath link to the woodland to the north of the site, and a link to 10 acres at the southeastern part of the site. It's also been proposed to improve the private road, which runs along the east boundary of the site, to create an active travel route and close it to through traffic onto the B908. This would require a formal stopping up process, which is regulated by a condition. The SUDS design has been amended to improve its amenity and biodiversity value, including the provision of rain gardens. The layout and landscaping would create a green link between the core path and the woodland on the north boundary. About 0.3 of a hectare of existing woodland has to be removed to accommodate the roundabout and development. There would be some replacement planting taken between the rear of the houses and the woodland. The site is crossed by overhead power lines and these have to be undergrounded or rerouted to accommodate the development. The actual application was supported by a number of documents and technical assessments, including a transport assessment, an open space and SUD strategy, preliminary ecological appraisal, a revised arboricultural impact assessment and constraints report, phase 1 arboricultural protection method statement, a landscape and biodiversity statement, flood risk assessment, stabilisation appraisal, a noise assessment and air quality impact assessment, and an archaeological written scheme of investigation. Works had begun to fell trees at the southern part of the woodland, as mentioned previously. This has ceased after the service was in contact with the applicant. Scottish Power were removing overhead lines, and they are doing that at present. This work can be undertaken without need for planning permission. It is worth noting that the trees that have been felled would have to be removed to accommodate the proposed roundabout. Paragraphs 3.5 to 3.9 outline the planning history of the site with regard to the granting of planning permission in principle, in terms of the section 75 and the matters specified in condition process. The responses from consultees are summarised in paragraphs 311 to 319. There's no consultees. As noted, SEEK has withdrawn its holding objection. They're satisfied that the applicant has addressed the issues. The co-authority had asked for clarification on legacy mining issues. Additional information has been submitted by the applicant, which has satisfactorily addressed their advice. Since the report was compiled, the co-authority has confirmed that information in relation to shallow workings is satisfactory, and it doesn't have any objection to approval of the application. Environmental health is satisfied that noise impact and air quality impacts have been satisfactorily addressed, including potential noise from the road and Jewson's on the new houses. Transportation is advised the roundabout and internal road layout are broadly acceptable and will be subject to approval under the road construction consent process. The applicant has been made aware of some aspects that will need to be met as part of the road construction process, including road and path gradients, which will have to be achieved. Similar to their advice on the master plan application, transportation has highlighted the same issues as they relate to phase 1. and require some further information and clarification before they're fully satisfied. Again, these relate to off-site transportation works, and these have been addressed through the planning conditions to ensure that the information has been submitted and approved before any development can commence on site. This will also include clarification or further assessment on flood risk in relation to surface water flows and groundwater sources. Off-site works have been considered and addressed through the application for the master plan, while the Section 75 also regulates this, as it requires agreement to be reached on the design, the specification and costs of the off-site works, and the Section 75 regulates the payment of contributions from the developer. However, to avoid a scenario where development proceeds before agreement has been reached, the conditions have been attached requiring these matters to also be agreed through the terms of this planning permission. The proposed road and footpath layout within Phase 1 is considered to be acceptable and adequately address placemaking principles and support active travel and sustainable travel options. Transportation advised that more segregated active travel routes be created within the site, and we've concluded that the proposed hierarchy of streets would be satisfactory, include segregated active travel paths along the most heavily trafficked and busier roads. On balance, the proposed development is considered to be acceptable in relation to delivering safe, sustainable travel options and infrastructure. 26 neighbours were notified of this application, advised in the local paper. One objection, one representation has been received, the content of which and our responses are summarised in paragraphs 3.22 and 3.23 of the report. The objection raised a number of issues relating to impact on local services, adequacy of open space, provision and impact on road network, protecting green space and wildlife, construction noise and pollution, and public transport provision. The representation was from the Scottish Wildlife Trust to identify 3 measures to enhance wildlife and biodiversity interests. The applicant has agreed to incorporate the points as part of the development. These are covered in one of the proposed planning conditions. Section 4 contains the planning assessment of the application in relation to the development plan. Paragraphs 4.7 to 4.23 summarise our assessment in relation to relevant policies and concludes that, subject to the proposed conditions, the application would not be contrary to policies, including those relating to biodiversity, natural places, woodland and trees, balloon green infrastructure, open space, as well as sustainable transport, design in place, local living, infrastructure provision, public art, flood risk and drainage. In order to help compensate for the loss of trees to accommodate the roundabout, the applicant has also agreed to undertake additional tree planting within the shelter belt, which encloses the north boundary of the site, to infill gaps, including where the overhead power line cut through, which will now be removed from this area. This will also enhance the biodiversity value of the woodland and help strengthen the natural screening of the site and views from the north. Excuse me. A condition has been attached to regulate this planting. Is concluded on balance, this application would not be contrary to the development plan. Section 5 summarises other material considerations, including advice from consultees, issues raised in the objection and representation, compatibility of the development with neighbouring land uses, relevant supplementary planning guidance published by the Council, and the compliance of the matters specified in condition application with conditions of the planning permission in principle. Application details and proposals are considered to satisfy the requirements of the relevant planning permission and principle conditions. Therefore concluded the application would accord with the provisions of the development plan, conditions of the planning permission and principle, and that there's no other material considerations which would outweigh development plan support and justify withholding permission. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in section 2 of the report.
Thank you. Keith, any questions? Councillor McTaggart, then Councillor Law, then Councillor Barsili.
Keith, you mentioned that there's information came in for the coal authority since the report was written. So are you satisfied that there are no risks from the historic coal? And I'd specifically like to know about the disturbance that there's likely to be a coal. Keith mentioned earlier, and Grant mentioned earlier, that grouting might be necessary. I'm assuming that's to fill channels, coal faces, access roads, etc., underground, that would have been necessary to facilitate the coal mining. So therefore, there's got to be ground opened up where coal is, which will result in dust, will result in contamination to soil, etc. So I'm just wondering how deep this risk assessment has gone, and will there be monitoring in the future to ensure that nobody is put at risk by the activities that will be required to grout, to remove any chance of disturbance in the future, etc. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, as part of the planning process now, the Coal Authority want a coal mining risk assessment submitted with any planning application where there's they have identified areas at higher risk from legacy mining. The purpose of that is really to ensure at the planning stage that the developer is aware of the potential risks and has considered a way of addressing it without having to provide all the detail of how to do it, because some of that will be covered at the building warrant stage in terms of the house design and the stability of it, and it being adequate for the relevant ground conditions. So at the planning stage, we don't have to have the details of precisely how it's done, but the Coal Authority want to ensure that a developer then doesn't discover something that nobody had realised, and then it creates a major problem for everyone. So the developer has carried out a mining appraisal. I think with the lengthy history of the site, planning history, I think the coal situation and mining situation is probably fairly well documented. So they have identified that there's parts of the site where there are shallow mine workings and they will have to be stabilised. The grouting, as far as I understand, involves them kind of pumping material down. So I don't think they'll have to excavate large areas, to stabilise. I think it'll be a case of them with drilling rigs and having to pump into any voids that are there just to stabilise it, rather than. So that activity will create a degree of noise activity, but it's relatively common within Clackmannanshire and other coal mining areas, and as long as there's adequate controls in terms of the environmental impacts, then I'm satisfied that's not going to cause a major problem. But I think the risks have been identified. The Coal Authorities advised us they're satisfied the risks have been identified, and they've advised they're satisfied with the proposed way of solving or resolving that risk. The detail of that will then also have to be agreed, my understanding, through the building warrant process as well. I think the planning requirements have adequately been addressed.
So as I asked, will this be, to seek the building warrant, will this include monitoring of the activity and provide assurance that that activity is not producing further risk to people around it, to the contamination of the air, the soil, etc. So will there be a monitoring process while that's ongoing?
One of the conditions requires a construction environment management plan. A document was submitted by an applicant which we don't consider covers all the requirements. So we can include within that, specific monitoring, regarding the grouting or the stabilisation works in terms of monitoring environmental impacts and minimising any impacts on the surrounding area, so we can achieve it through that.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
So when I've been looking at the plan in regards to road surfaces, I know that what appears to be monoblocking is used for quite a large chunk of the road surfaces and the shared pavements. My understanding is that monoblocking is good in order to get, obviously, water to permeate through. However, that needs an ongoing maintenance plan and it needs to be cleared out I've seen between 6 months and a year, and as far as I'm aware, the roads team do not do that. So I feel that the monoblocking is an inappropriate surface for us to have, because in regards to surface water, it then doesn't actually do what it's meant to do. And then I don't know if anybody actually has lived on a monoblock street. When it freezes, it is an ice rink. So I was hoping that we could put in something that surface needs to be something else rather than monoblocking, because I just don't feel that it's appropriate to have. I know that it is, as I said, used in quite a lot of developments, but in my opinion, it doesn't actually do its job. I just wondered if there's any comment on that.
Yeah, obviously the roads will be subject to the roads construction consent procedures in terms of what the council adopt and what they don't adopt. And the principle in Clacks for a long time has been the shared surface streets. Excuse me. Are finished in monoblock. There are some issues about where there's certain gradients and monoblocking maybe becomes an issue, just the points you're referring to in terms of, icing over. But the Roads Authority have been adopting monoblock streets for a long time. They do provide a good environment for shared surface residential streets. So Road Service has been heavily involved in discussing and agreeing the type of surfaces we've got in here. But there will be a further stage, I think it's a technical stage at the RCC, when there may be some areas identified that monoblocks maybe aren't appropriate, whether that's to do with the gradients or the sort of type of street that is. But what's really taking shape here is a kind of hierarchy of streets, from the sort of main spine road to roads going into housing phases, and then into the sort of cul-de-sacs and what have you. So I think it's important that the surfaces sort of reflect what type of street it is in any one case.
I'm sorry, I would tend to disagree, because even on flat surfaces, when this ice overs, it is an ice rink, and having walked them, it is an ice rink when even on a flat surface. And also, I don't think that, as far as I know, the roads, sorry, my internet's gone again, the roads team would replace the monoblocking should there be an issue with it as well. So I think that would then just get tarred over. And I just wondered, when we are doing our kind of surface water assessments, that do we take into account that the monoblocking then doesn't become permeable, so that the water isn't getting through? Because I feel that down the line will then become an issue with surface water. But also in regards to that and the kind of surface water, what happens in many of these housing developments is that people then do additional driveways and their back gardens get paved over. This will cause additional surface water, and I just wondered if that gets taken into account when we're doing our assessments, because obviously we've got a gradient here on the hill. The people higher up might be okay, but the people further down are going to get quite a lot of surface water kind of going towards their gardens. And I just wondered if there is something that we could put in development that people, residents, are not allowed to create additional driveways or pavings to, say, I don't know, 50% in order to try and help the drainage of water, rather than creating these surfaces that water is just going to flow off, because we do need the water to slow down, and that's obviously why we've got rain gardens in here. But we're not really taking into account the water that will be hitting in people's actual gardens.
As far as I understand, in terms of the monoblock roads, the Council Roads Authority don't yet adopt porous monoblocking, because that, as you were alluding to, does have a maintenance regime associated with it, which is quite significant in terms of basically kind of having to hoover out all the silts and what have you from the monoblocks, or else to stop being porous. And then, as you say, you can have a situation where the water runs off much quicker than it's meant to. So, as far as I'm aware, the monoblock streets that we have already have their own drainage systems. They don't rely on the blocks absorbing the water, and that's still something the Roads Authority have not yet accepted in adopted streets. In terms of residents doing their own bits and pieces, of extending their driveways or hard surfaces in the back garden, that's inevitable in any development, as you know. Keep it right here. As far as I know, if someone's extended their driveway at the front, they're required to use porous surfacing themselves. In terms of other areas of their garden, there's permitted development rights for residents to do certain things in their garden, whether that's putting down decking or sheds or garages, so that applies all over, So the area in the front, think about Keith, if someone was extended, they would have to use a porous surface to reduce the runoff.
Yeah, there are permitted development rights, and I think if it sheds water towards the public road, it has to be a porous surface that they use. The landscape design for phase one, excuse me, the developer has introduced hedgerows along the front gardens and street trees. I don't think we can reasonably stop people maybe putting hard surfaces down, but hopefully those measures as well will maybe deter where there's opportunities to widen driveways, and will also help in terms of water management, having that planting within the front gardens.
Can I just check about gritting as well? Because obviously these will be on a gradient. Will there be gritting? Will that be, like, I take it, factored for the residents?
I think gritting will be still the responsibility of the council on public adopted roads, and that will still lie with the council. And the road service have maximum gradients that they will adopt, so that all the roads have to be adopted will have to achieve their maximum gradient standards.
So the roads that aren't adopted, I take it that will then be down to the residents to maintain through, I don't know, a factor, or is that?
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Okay.
Basically, then, does the council only adopt metalled surfaces? It doesn't adopt non-block surfaces?
No, the council will adopt monoblock surfaces. So there may be some areas of shared driveways, let's say for 2 or 3 houses, that will remain private, but any streets of any significance will normally be adopted.
Finished, Councillor Long?
Yeah.
Councillor Balsillie.
Keith, in terms of open space provision, there's reference there that the landscape that we're talking about will include amenity areas, which will include children's play equipment, rain gardens are mentioned. But when do we actually nail that down? Because we've had issues with this before where we've been promised equipped play areas and the equipment's never arrived. It's been open space areas. How do we secure that for what should we normally expect for 157 houses in terms of toddler play? And I know that's quite a precise question, but the essence of my question is how do we nail that, ensure that we get equipped play on the site?
Excuse me. I think the layout for phase one, there's two areas of amenity space, and as I say, in terms of the Section 75 agreement, just got it here, but before commencement of development of any phase, the details of the timing and delivery of any landscaping, open space and play areas, including details for ongoing maintenance and future ownership, have to be agreed with the council. So those precise details have still to be agreed with us, but we have that mechanism through there to ensure that these very points, design and future maintenance arrangements have been submitted and we are satisfied before they can actually start building. So that's something which should ensure we don't have any issues, and then it will be up to the service to monitor compliance with that going forward.
And just another quick question. Sorry, I'm going to appear very pedantic here. In terms of
Turn with your mics off.
In terms of condition I think it's 3F that refers to, again, this percentage for that. It talks about contribution on site, and I think I would prefer that that said on site and off site in relation to this phase, because it would allow you to provide public art off site, and later on we talk about that there's a statement saying that there's already a strategy for public art, which I haven't seen, but it refers to the core path routes, which is then out with this site. Can you tell me a little bit about your thinking about the wording in that? So it's in the dialogue box under public art as well. So what I'm asking you, in terms of that condition F, where you're referring to on-site, does that allow for off-site public art?
Yes, I mean, I think, again, this is slightly overlapped with Section 75 agreement, but public art is a specific clause in the agreement, and it did allow for, so it requires a public art strategy to be submitted and approved. The applicant has submitted information about it, which was based on on-site delivery rather than off-site, and it was going to be a series of art installations along the kind of linear arc along the core path, which to some extent seems a reasonable or potentially attractive option. So that is the basis of their submission. That, again, that detail has still to be approved by the service, but that is what they had tabled with ourselves as being the proposal, and the arrangements for the design, funding and delivery, again, are regulated through Section 75. We can, through that discharge of that condition, raise or discuss off-site delivery as well, if that's committee's, decision. As I say, I think the developer has that option to put forward on-site, off-site, or a hybrid. So it is something that could be discussed with them in terms of discharging the condition and the terms of the Section 75.
Yeah, just try not to. So in terms of that condition F, although it refers to on-site, there is flexibility for off-site public art.
What I'm saying is that the Section 75 does allow for either or combination.
Right.
What is the case is the applicant has indicated they would prefer to deliver it on site. So that's something, and I think what they've tabled does seem, reasonable approach, and would again contribute to the quality of the open space, and the core path is obviously used by others as a key active travel route, so there would be benefits in that. So it might tick both the boxes in terms of it being next to the core path, in terms of aspirations to enhance core paths. But I think from what's been, in terms of the question you've asked, we could review that or ask in the discussions to finalise the public art strategy whether there's scope for any contribution to some off-site delivery as well.
I think at council level, I'd prefer if we did have flexibility for the.
I think from a council's perspective, I'd prefer if we had an off-site option as well. But I'm taking Keith's reassurance that embedded within the Section 75, although it's not reflected in the condition, which is the bit that's worrying me. It's condition 3F, and this is a finalised public art strategy for site. This shall include details of the specification and design of the public art within the site and the timescale for delivery in future, which seems fine. But I would just say, is there a chance we can change that to within or out with the site, which gives us greater flexibility for the overall master plan. the section 75 agreement gives us that flexibility if you needed some, and then there's reference, so it's already been submitted. As an elected member, I'd be really useful if you could send me that art submission. I've got some personal interest in how public art's progressed within Clackmannanshire. So
There is a paper, I think, on the council website that you can download. It's the triangle sheets. I don't know if you've seen that one or not. Water cut metal. A series of installations, vertical installations.
Really?
What time we look at the
I'll have a website, Chair. Thank you.
Just to pick up that point, so for clarity's sake, although it says here on page 58, it's the offering has been made for on-site artwork. You're telling us that section 75 permits a negotiation for off-site, and that should put Councillor Bill at ease to some extent.
That is the case, Chair. I mean, the condition in the report is reflecting or relates to the phase 1 development. So the reference to public art within the site is because the condition for phase 1 really can only regulate works within phase 1,
Sure.
Which is why, and that's why it says that rather than without with. It is the case that the section 75 does allow for on or off-site delivery, so we can rely on that.
Okay. Councillor Law?
Sorry, I'm going to be pedantic. So for the play area, just to confirm, we've not got the concrete detail as to whether that will be an equipped play park or not an equipped play park currently. Is that correct?
We don't have the details of precise equipment, but the plans are annotated, excuse me, as equipped play equipment. So there will be equipment, we just don't have the precise details of what it's going to be.
So can we have that noted? That it will be an equipped play park? Those details just haven't been confirmed. Just for previous applications, it's been a big sticking point, so I just wanted to clarify that. Also, just another, Rhodes question. I know that Rhodes had highlighted the visitor parking being an issue. I just wondered, has that been from the plan that's here, has that been expanded from what the comment was? Because I think the comment from the developer was they thought it was sufficient, but obviously Rhodes have said that they didn't think it's sufficient, and it's just a sticking point because people will then park wherever, and then that causes safety issues. So I just wondered if that has been expanded, just in regards to safety.
My understanding is that the visitor parking layout has not been signed off by Rhodes. They can regulate that through the road construction consent. So the road layout and facilities and design will also have to be approved by them before the developer can commence. So that's going to be resolved through that process to ensure that the spacing and location meets Rhodes requirements.
Would that inevitably mean that the open space is reduced? It's currently on the plan, and then obviously that would affect the biodiversity, enhanced biodiversity of the site.
No, that wouldn't be an assumption to make about that. I mean, if there's changes to the layout which encroaches on something that we consider material, say the open space provision or landscaping, then that's something that we can ensure is addressed. And I'm not envisaging that being the case, but as I say, that's something we will have to monitor in terms of getting that concluded. I think it's just cases of, excuse me, parallel parking spaces and their distribution within the site rather than any major increase in numbers.
Any other questions? Just a general question. There are a lot of matters here that are still subject to agreement. Is this the first and last time we will see this plan in council? From this point onwards, if we pass the paper today, we are then relying on all of these matters being resolved by officer. We will not see this again, is that correct?
Essentially, that's correct, yeah. Yeah.
Not that we have any doubt to you. But it's comforting to know that you're good chaps and on the job. Okay, no further questions. In that case, I will formally propose the paper. I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Earl, thank you very much. Do you wish to debate the paper? No. Right. Are we minded to approve? We are. Paper is approved. Right. We want a wee break. I know it's early, but we want a comfort break for 10 minutes. Yeah. Comfort break for 10 minutes, folks. So we 20 past. 20 past.